My name is Rachel Foster. I was 34 years old, working as a dental hygienist at Bright Smiles Dental Clinic in Scottsdale, when my mother told me I wasn't welcome in her home anymore. The words came through the phone on a Tuesday afternoon, casual and cold, like she was declining a magazine subscription. "We think it's best if you don't come around for a while. You've always been difficult, Rachel, and frankly we need peace in our lives right now." I stood in the staff break room, still wearing my purple scrubs, a half-eaten turkey sandwich sitting forgotten on the counter. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just said okay and ended the call. What my mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for the past 10 years, I had been the one keeping a roof over their heads. Every single month without fail I had paid their mortgage. The same mortgage on the house in Glendale where Sunday dinners happened, where my brother Brandon's kids opened Christmas presents, where my mother told me I was no longer welcome. And in that moment, standing under the fluorescent lights with the hum of the refrigerator in my ears, I made a decision. If I wasn't family enough to walk through their door, then I wasn't family enough to keep paying their bills. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The call shouldn't have surprised me. My mother had been building toward it for months, maybe years. Small comments that landed like paper cuts. "Why don't you dress up more when you come over? Are you still renting that little place in Tempe? You know Brandon just got promoted again." Each one delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. But that Tuesday something had shifted. Her voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. A finality that made my stomach drop even as I tried to keep my face neutral. My coworker Lisa walked into the break room just as I set my phone down on the table. She took one look at me and frowned. "You okay? You look like you just got bad news." I shook my head and picked up my sandwich, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to swallow another bite. Just family stuff. Nothing new. But it was new. It was completely new and I didn't yet understand how new it would get. That evening I sat in my small one-bedroom apartment with the windows open, letting in the dry Phoenix heat that never really left, even in October. The walls were painted a soft cream color that the landlord had chosen, not me. The furniture was a mix of thrift store finds and hand-me-downs. Nothing matched, but it was clean and it was mine. I had lived here for 6 years, paying $950 a month, never late, never asking for anything. It wasn't glamorous, but I had made it home. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I kept buried in my documents, the one labeled simply Glendale House. Inside were 10 years of bank statements, payment confirmations, and a spreadsheet I updated every month. Mortgage payment to Desert Valley Credit Union, $1,273. Due on the 15th. Paid on the 10th every single time. I scrolled through the entries, watching the numbers stack up. 10 years. 120 payments. A total of $152,760. Not including the 3 times I had covered property taxes when my parents were short, or the insurance payment I had quietly handled when my father's hours got cut at the post office before he retired. I leaned back against the couch and stared at the ceiling. How did it even start? I could still remember the day, clear as glass. I had been 24, fresh out of hygienist school, just starting my first real job. My parents had been struggling. My father's hours had been reduced, my mother didn't work, and Brandon, who still lived with them at the time, contributed nothing. I had come over for dinner and overheard them in the kitchen, voices low and strained. "We're 3 months behind. Dennis, they're going to foreclose." My mother's voice had trembled in a way I had never heard before. "What are we supposed to do?" I didn't think. I just walked in and said I could help. Temporarily. Just until they got back on their feet. My mother had looked at me like I had offered her the moon. "Oh, Rachel, honey, we couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." My father had clapped me on the shoulder, relief flooding his face. "We'll pay you back. Promise. Just a few months." That was 10 years ago. They never paid me back. They never even acknowledged it after the first year. First, they had been grateful. My mother would hug me extra long when I came over. My father would sneak me an extra $20 for gas. But gratitude has a shelf life, especially when it's never spoken out loud. By the second year, the payments had become invisible. Expected. By the 5th year, I wasn't even thanked. I was just Rachel. The daughter who worked at the dentist's office and didn't have kids or a husband or anything important going on. The one who could shoulder the weight because what else was I doing with my money? Brandon, on the other hand, was the star. He was 3 years older, charming in the way that irresponsible people often are. He had bounced from job to job, always with a story about a bad boss or bad luck. He married Kristen when he was 30, and they had 2 kids by the time he was 33. Tyler and Madison, my niece and nephew who I adored. Brandon and Kristen lived in a rental twice the size of my apartment, drove a new SUV they definitely couldn't afford, and showed up to every family gathering with expensive wine and big stories. My mother loved him in the way parents love their chaos children, with a protective ferocity that excused everything. He's trying, Rachel. He's got a family to support. It's hard out there for him. And me? I was dependable. Boring. The one who didn't need anything. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that tourists paid good money to photograph. Somewhere across town, my parents were sitting in their living room, the one with the vaulted ceilings and the stone fireplace, the house that I had kept them from losing. And I was no longer welcome there. The next morning I went to work like always. I smiled at patients, cleaned teeth, made small talk about weekend plans and kids' soccer games. But my mind was somewhere else. I kept replaying my mother's words. You've always been difficult, Rachel. Difficult. I had paid their mortgage for a decade and I was difficult. During my lunch break, I sat in my car and called my best friend Jessica. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and familiar. Hey, what's up? I need to tell you something, I said. And then I told her everything. The years of payments, the secret I had kept, the phone call from my mother. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end. Jess finally spoke, her voice tight with anger. Rachel, are you kidding me right now? You've been paying their mortgage for 10 years and they don't even know? They know, I said quietly. They have to know. The payments come from somewhere. Unless they think the mortgage fairy handles it, yeah, they know. They just don't want to admit it. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. But I'm not paying this month. Good, Jess said firmly. It's about damn time. That afternoon I made a decision. I needed proof. Not just for myself but in case this went somewhere I couldn't yet predict. I scheduled a meeting with an accountant, someone Jess recommended named Marcus Webb. He worked at a small firm in Chandler and had a reputation for being thorough and discreet. I met him on Thursday evening after work. His office was small but organized, with neat rows of binders and a desk that looked like it had never seen clutter. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with dark hair and glasses that made him look perpetually thoughtful. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from him. So, Jessica said you need help with some family financial documentation. That's one way to put it, I said. I handed him a USB drive with all my records. For the past 10 years I've been paying my parents' mortgage. They're listed as the owners, but every payment has come from my personal account. I need to know if there's any legal standing here. Any way to prove what I've done. Marcus plugged in the drive and started scrolling through the files, his expression unreadable. Did they ask you to do this? Yes. Initially. And then it just continued. Did you ever formalize it? A loan agreement, a contract, anything in writing? No. It was supposed to be temporary. He nodded slowly, still reading. Do they know you're still paying? Think so. But they've never mentioned it. Not in years. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. Legally, this is tricky. Without a contract, it's hard to claim this as a loan. Could be considered a gift. But if you can prove consistent payments over time and demonstrate that there was an expectation of repayment, even verbal, we might be able to build a case. Not for reimbursement necessarily, but to establish your financial contribution to the property. Why would I need that? He met my eyes. Because if you're thinking about stopping payments, they need to know what they're losing. And if this turns ugly, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You'll want documentation to protect yourself. I left his office with a pit in my stomach and a folder full of organized records. Marcus had printed everything, highlighted the totals, cross-referenced payment dates with mortgage statements I hadn't even known I could request. He was thorough. Uncomfortably so. But I was grateful. The 15th of the month came and went. For the first time in 10 years, I did not make the mortgage payment. I sat at my kitchen table that morning with my laptop open, staring at the payment portal for Desert Valley Credit Union. My finger hovered over the button. All I had to do was click. Transfer funds. Confirm. Done. But I didn't. I closed the laptop and went to work. The first week passed without a word. Then the second. I waited for a call, a text, something. Nothing came. By the third week, I started to wonder if they had even noticed. Maybe they had money saved. Maybe Brandon had finally stepped up. Maybe I had been worrying for nothing. Then on a Wednesday afternoon my phone rang. It was my father. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Rachel, his voice sounded strained. We need to talk. Okay. Can you come by the house? I was told I'm not welcome there. There was a pause. Your mother was upset. She didn't mean it like that. Then what did she mean? Another pause, longer this time. Just come by. Please. We need to talk about something important. I'll think about it, I said and hung up. I didn't go. Not that day, not that week. Instead, I went to see Marcus again. He had done more digging, pulled records I didn't even know existed. When I sat down across from him, he slid a folder across the desk. Your parents refinanced the house 4 years ago. Did you know that? No. They pulled out $60,000 in equity. The monthly payment increased by $200. You've been covering that increase too. I stared at the papers in front of me, the numbers blurring together. $60,000. What did they spend it on? I don't know, Marcus said gently, but it wasn't to pay you back. I felt something crack inside me, something that had been holding steady for years. They refinanced. They took out more money, and I just kept paying. He nodded. There's something else. The house is in both their names, but your mother is listed as the primary on all the paperwork. If they default, it's her credit that tanks first. I looked up at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know what you're dealing with. This isn't just about money. It's about control. And from what you've told me, your mother has been controlling the narrative in your family for a long time. He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing it and accepting it were two very different things. I went home that night and poured myself a glass of wine I didn't drink. I sat on my couch in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights, just watching the shadows stretch across the walls. My phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark, silent. Part of me wanted it to ring. Part of me dreaded it. The truth was settling into my bones now, heavy and unavoidable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a temporary rough patch in family relations. This was a pattern, a decade-long pattern of being used and then discarded when I dared to have boundaries. My mother hadn't called to apologize. My father's call hadn't been to check on me. It had been about the money. It was always about the money. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mother and 2 text messages. The first text read, Rachel, we need to discuss some financial matters. Please call me today. The second, sent an hour later, said, this is urgent. Don't ignore me. I deleted both messages without responding. At work, I threw myself into my routine with an intensity that made Lisa raise her eyebrows. You're scrubbing that tray like it personally offended you, she said, watching me clean instruments with more force than necessary. Just working out some frustration, I said. Family stuff still? Always family stuff. She dried her hands and leaned against the counter. You know, my therapist told me once that the people who demand the most grace are usually the ones who give the least. I stopped scrubbing and looked at her. That's depressingly accurate. She shrugged. Family's complicated. But you don't owe anyone your peace of mind. Not even blood. Her words stayed with me through the rest of the day. By the time I got home, the sun was setting again, casting that particular amber light that made everything look both beautiful and melancholy. I checked my mail and found a letter mixed in with the usual junk and bills. The return address made my heart skip. Desert Valley Credit Union. I tore it open, standing right there in the parking lot. It was a formal notice, addressed to Dennis and Patricia Foster, regarding their past due mortgage account. Payment was now 45 days overdue. If payment was not received within 15 days, late fees would be assessed, and the account would be reported to credit bureaus. After 90 days, foreclosure proceedings could begin. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. They had sent it to my address. Why would they send it to my address? Unless. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He answered immediately. Rachel, I was just about to call you. I got a letter from the mortgage company. Sent to my address. He was quiet for a moment. When you set up the automatic payments 10 years ago, what address did you use? Mine. I used my address for the payment account because it was easier to keep track of. But the house is in their names. Right, but the payment portal might have defaulted to using the billing address associated with the bank account making the payments. That would be yours. So they might not even know they're late yet. They might not have gotten the notice. Exactly. I sat down on the curb outside my apartment building, the concrete still warm from the day's heat. This changed things. If they didn't know they were late, then my father's call hadn't been about the mortgage at all. It had been about something else. But what? Marcus cleared his throat on the other end of the line. Rachel, there's something else I found. I pulled records from the county assessor's office. Your parents' property taxes have been paid every year on time, for the past decade. I paid those. Some of them, yes. But not all of them. 3 years ago, there was a payment made that didn't come from your account. I tracked it down. It came from an LLC. What LLC? It's called Foster Family Holdings. Registered to Brandon Foster. My brother has an LLC? Apparently. And he made one property tax payment 3 years ago. $5,000. Then nothing since. I pressed my fingers to my temples trying to process this. Why would Brandon pay property taxes once and then stop? I don't know. But it means he knows about the house finances. He's involved somehow. This isn't just your parents keeping secrets from you. This is your whole family. I thanked Marcus and ended the call. But I stayed sitting on that curb for another 20 minutes, watching cars pull into the complex, watching neighbors come home from work, watching life happen around me while mine felt like it was unraveling in slow motion. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I drove past my parents' house. I didn't stop, didn't pull into the driveway, just drove slowly down their street in Glendale. The house looked exactly the same. Desert landscaping with decorative rocks and a few stubborn cacti. The garage door was closed. My father's truck sat in the driveway, slightly dusty. The porch light was on even though it was mid-afternoon. Everything looked normal, stable, permanent. Everything looked like a lie. I kept driving, circling the block once more before heading back toward Tempe. As I drove, I called Jessica. She answered with her usual energy. Please tell me you're calling with an update and not to cancel our dinner plans tomorrow. Both, actually. I might need to cancel. Absolutely not. You're not sitting home alone obsessing over this. We're going to that new Thai place and you're going to tell me everything. Fine, I said, feeling the smallest smile tug at my lips. But you're buying. Deal. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that property tax payment from Brandon's LLC. Why would he have an LLC? He worked in sales, or at least he claimed to. He wasn't a business owner. He wasn't an entrepreneur. He was barely employed most of the time. At 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. I started searching. Foster Family Holdings LLC, Arizona. It took me 15 minutes to find the registration documents, public record buried in the Arizona Corporation Commission website. The LLC had been established 4 years ago. The registered agent was Brandon Foster. The business address listed was my parents' house in Glendale. I sat back staring at the screen. 4 years ago. The same time my parents refinanced and pulled out $60,000. I grabbed my phone and texted Marcus. Even though it was the middle of the night. Found the LLC registration. Established 4 years ago, same time as the refinance. Can't be a coincidence. To my surprise, he texted back within minutes. Agreed. We need to find out what that $60,000 was used for. I'm guessing it went to Brandon. Monday morning. I'll pull business records for the LLC. See if there's any financial trail. Get some sleep. Easy for you to say, I typed back. Fair point. But try anyway. Sunday came and I successfully avoided all family contact. My phone rang twice, both times from my mother, both times I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message either time, which told me everything I needed to know. If it had been important, if it had been about my well-being, she would have left a message. This was about control. This was about me not falling in line. Jessica and I met for dinner at the Thai place in downtown Phoenix. She was already seated when I arrived, looking effortlessly put together in a way I never managed. She waved me over and pushed a menu across the table. I ordered you the spring rolls. You look like you need spring rolls. I do, I admitted, sliding into the booth. She studied my face. You look tired. When's the last time you actually slept? Friday, maybe. Rachel. I know. I'll sleep when this is over. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Tell me everything. What did you find? So I told her. The refinance. The $60,000. Brandon's LLC. The property tax payment. The letter from the mortgage company. All of it spilled out between bites of pad thai and spring rolls, the story getting more absurd with every detail. When I finished, Jessica sat back and shook her head slowly. Your family is unbelievable. I mean, I knew they were bad, but this is like next level. Manipulation. I don't even know what to do with it all, I said. Every time I think I understand the scope of it, there's something else. What does Marcus think? He thinks Brandon got that $60,000. He thinks they refinanced to bail him out of something and I've been paying for it ever since. And you're just now finding out. 10 years, Jess. 10 years I've been paying their bills, and not only did they never thank me, they cut me out the second I wasn't useful anymore. You're useful now, she pointed out. That's why your dad called. They figured out the payments stopped. They just don't want to admit they need you. Pride, I said bitterly. The Foster family specialty. Monday morning, Marcus called before I even got to work. I pulled over into a coffee shop parking lot to take the call. You were right, he said without preamble. The $60,000 went to Brandon. I found the paper trail. 2 days after your parents refinanced, Brandon's LLC received a $55,000 cash injection, documented as a family loan. A family loan that I've been paying back, I said, without knowing it. Exactly. And here's the kicker. The LLC was supposed to be for a business venture, some kind of consulting company. It never made a single dollar. No clients, no revenue, no business activity at all. It's a shell. So he took $55,000 for a fake business. That's fraud, isn't it? Could be. But proving intent is tricky, especially within a family. What matters is that you've been subsidizing your brother's failed schemes while being told you're the problem. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand. What do I do with this information? That's up to you. But if you're planning to confront them, you'll want all your documentation organized. I can help with that. Put together a full financial breakdown. I want it, I said. Everything. Every payment, every date, every dollar. I want them to see exactly what I've done. Consider it done. I'll have it ready by Wednesday. That week crawled by. Every day felt like I was walking around with a secret too big for my body, something pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I went to work, I smiled at patients, I made small talk about the weather and holiday plans. But inside, I was counting down to Wednesday, to the moment when I would have undeniable proof of everything I'd sacrificed. My mother called twice more. I didn't answer. My father sent a text. Your mother is very upset. Please call her. I deleted it. Brandon surprisingly reached out too. A Facebook message that popped up while I was scrolling through my feed on Tuesday night. Hey sis, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay? You missed Tyler's soccer game last week. He asked about you. The casual manipulation of it made my jaw clench. Using my nephew to guilt me into responding, I typed out 3 different replies and deleted them all. Finally, I just wrote, been busy. Tell Tyler I'm sorry. I'll catch the next one. I won't though, because there wouldn't be a next one. Not until this was resolved. Not until they understood what they'd done. Wednesday came. I left work early and drove to Marcus's office in Chandler. The sun was brutal, the kind of dry heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement. Inside, his office was blessedly cool. He had everything ready. A bound report professionally printed with tabs and highlighted sections. He walked me through it page by page. Total payments made $152,760. Total duration 10 years 2 months. Average monthly payment $1,273. Additional payments made for property taxes, insurance, and 1 emergency roof repair $18,300. Grand total contribution $171,060. That number sat in the air between us, impossible and real. $171,000. Enough for a down payment on a house. Enough to change someone's life. Enough to prove I was never the problem. Marcus turned to another section. Here's the refinance documentation. Here's the transfer to Brandon's LLC. And here's the most damning part. He showed me a series of emails he'd somehow obtained through public records requests. Emails between my parents and the bank during the refinance process. In one of them, my mother explicitly stated that their daughter had been helping with payments but that they wanted to access their equity for family investments. Family investments. That's what they called it. I felt my hands start to shake. They knew. Of course they knew. But seeing it in writing was different. They had used me deliberately, systematically, and then acted like I was unreasonable for wanting acknowledgement. Marcus closed the folder gently. What do you want to do with this? I looked up at him. His expression was neutral but his eyes were kind. I could tell he'd seen situations like this before. Families tearing themselves apart over money and pride. I want to show them, I said. I want them to see what they've done. When? Thanksgiving. That's 2 weeks away. I know. But it's perfect. The whole family will be there. Brandon, Kristen, the kids, everyone. They can't hide. They can't spin it. They'll have to face it. He nodded slowly. That's going to be nuclear. Good, I said. Maybe it's time for an explosion. The 2 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving were the strangest of my life. I went through the motions of normal existence while carrying around this enormous secret. This bomb I was planning to detonate in the middle of what was supposed to be a family holiday. My mother called 3 more times. Each voicemail got progressively more irritated. Rachel, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this silent treatment is childish. We're family. You can't just ignore us. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. On the Monday before Thanksgiving, I got a text from Brandon. Mom said you're being weird. What's going on? Talk to me. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to reply, to give him a chance to come clean, to maybe salvage something before it all fell apart. But I knew better. Brandon had never been honest a day in his life. He was my mother's son in every way that mattered. I didn't respond. Jessica came over the night before Thanksgiving. She brought wine and moral support and helped me rehearse what I was going to say. You don't have to do this, she reminded me for the 100th time. You could just walk away. Never speak to them again. Start fresh. I agreed. But then they'd never know. They'd tell themselves some story about how I was difficult, how I abandoned them. They'd make me the villain. And honestly, Jess, I'm tired of being the villain in someone else's story. She raised her glass. To telling the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts, I corrected, and we clinked glasses. Thanksgiving morning arrived with clear skies and temperatures in the mid-70s, perfect Arizona autumn weather. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy dress and flats, nothing too formal, nothing that would draw attention before I was ready. I packed the bound report Marcus had prepared into my bag, along with my own folder of bank statements and printed emails. Evidence. Proof. Truth. The drive to Glendale felt both too long and too short. My hands were steady on the wheel but my heart was racing. I had texted my mother the night before, just one line. I'll be there tomorrow at 2. Her response had been immediate. Good. We need to talk. Yes, I had thought. We certainly do. I pulled up to the house at exactly 2 o'clock. Brandon's SUV was already in the driveway, along with a car I didn't recognize. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the house I had saved, the home I had kept standing through a decade of secret sacrifice. Then I grabbed my bag and walked to the front door. My mother opened it before I could knock. Her expression was tight, her smile forced. Rachel, you're here. I am. Come in. We're just starting to get things ready. The house smelled like turkey and stuffing, familiar holiday scents that usually made me feel warm and nostalgic. Today they just made me feel sad. Everything that was about to happen, it couldn't be undone. I was about to burn down every bridge, every connection, every illusion of family unity. And I was choosing to do it anyway. Brandon was in the living room, beer in hand, watching football with my father. He looked up when I walked in and grinned. Hey stranger. Thought you'd gone into witness protection or something. Something like that, I said. Kristen emerged from the kitchen, Madison on her hip. Oh, Rachel, thank God. Can you help me with the sweet potatoes? Your mom's being very particular about the marshmallow ratio. Sure, I said, following her into the kitchen. I could do sweet potatoes. I could do normal for a little while longer. Just until dinner was served. Just until everyone was sitting down. Then the truth would come out, and nothing would ever be normal again. Dinner preparations continued around me like a play I was watching rather than participating in. My mother directed traffic in the kitchen, telling Kristen to use less butter, telling me to chop the onions smaller, telling my father to open the wine. Brandon lounged in the living room with Tyler, occasionally calling out commentary on the football game. It was all so familiar, this choreography we performed dozens of times. Except this time I knew it was the last time. We sat down to eat at 4 o'clock. The dining table was extended with its extra leaf, covered in my mother's good tablecloth, the ivory one with embroidered edges. The turkey sat in the center, golden and perfect. Side dishes crowded every available inch of space. It looked like a magazine spread, like the fantasy of what Thanksgiving should be. My father said grace. We bowed our heads and he thanked God for family, for blessings, for the food before us and the love that surrounded us. I kept my eyes closed and my mouth shut. When he finished, everyone said amen and reached for serving spoons. For the first 20 minutes, everything was normal. People ate, complimented the food, made small talk about Tyler's soccer season and Madison's upcoming dance recital. Brandon told a long story about a difficult client at work, embellishing for laughs. Kristen asked about my job and I gave vague positive answers. My mother watched me from across the table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Suspicion, maybe. Or concern. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. Finally, during a lull in conversation, my father cleared his throat. Rachel, your mother and I wanted to talk to you about something. Here we go, I thought. I set down my fork and looked at him directly. Okay. He glanced at my mother, who nodded slightly. We've been having some financial difficulties lately. Some unexpected expenses. And we noticed that the mortgage payment didn't go through last month. Or this month. We were wondering if maybe there was some kind of bank error on your end. The table went very quiet. Brandon looked confused. Kristen was suddenly very interested in cutting Madison's turkey. My mother watched me with those sharp eyes that had always seen too much. What mortgage payment, I said flatly, are you referring to? Dennis, my father, shifted uncomfortably. You know, the arrangement we have. The help you've been providing. The help I've been providing, I repeated. For how long, Dad? He blinked. Well, a while now. I think we're all a little unclear on exactly when it started. 10 years, I said. 10 years, 2 months and 17 days. The number hung in the air like smoke. Brandon finally spoke up. Wait, what are you talking about? What arrangement? I turned to look at my brother, really look at him. He seemed genuinely confused, but there was something else underneath. Something that looked almost like panic. I've been paying Mom and Dad's mortgage for 10 years. Every month. $1,273. Without fail. Until last month when I stopped. The confusion on Brandon's face deepened, but now my mother was staring at me with open hostility. Rachel, this is not the time or place for this discussion. Actually, I think it's the perfect time, I said. Everyone's here. Everyone should know. Know what? Kristen asked carefully, looking between us. I reached down and pulled the folder from my bag, setting it on the table next to my plate. I've brought documentation, bank statements, payment records, everything. Would you like to see it? My father's face had gone pale. Rachel, honey, we can talk about this privately. We've never talked about it at all, I said, my voice rising slightly. Not in years. You stopped acknowledging it. You stopped thanking me. You just took and acted like I didn't exist unless you needed something. And then when I finally set a boundary, when I said I needed space, Mom told me I wasn't welcome here anymore. That's not what I meant, my mother snapped. You were being difficult. I was being difficult, I repeated slowly. I've given you $171,000 over 10 years and I'm difficult. The number landed like a grenade. Brandon choked on his drink. Kristen gasped. Tyler asked what $171,000 meant and was shushed. My father just stared at me, mouth slightly open, clearly doing math in his head. That can't be right, my mother said, but her voice was shaky. It is right, I said, opening the folder. Every payment is documented. Every transfer, every date, every amount. Would you like me to read them out loud, or would you prefer to review them yourself? Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating, until finally Brandon said quietly, "Where did all that money go?" And that's when I smiled cold and sharp. "Good question, Brandon. Why don't you tell everyone about Foster Family Holdings LLC and the $55,000 family loan?" Brandon's face drained of color so fast I thought he might actually pass out. He set his beer down carefully, like he was handling something fragile, and his eyes darted to our parents. "What are you talking about?" he said, but his voice came out strangled, unconvincing. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, flipping to a tab section in my folder. "For years ago, Mom and Dad refinanced this house. They pulled out $60,000 in equity. 2 days later, $55,000 of that money was transferred to an LLC registered in your name, Foster Family Holdings, a business that has never made a single dollar, never had a single client, never done anything except receive that one large cash infusion." I slid the documents across the table toward him. The registration papers were on top, his signature clear as day. "Care to explain?" Kristen turned to look at her husband, her expression shifting from confusion to something harder. "Brandon, what is she talking about? You said that money was from your signing bonus." "What signing bonus?" my mother interjected sharply. "You haven't had a signing bonus in years." Brandon's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He looked around the table, searching for an ally, finding none. "It was for a business opportunity," he finally said. "A consulting thing. It didn't pan out." "Didn't pan out," I repeated. "Brandon, it never existed in the first place. You registered a shell company, took $55,000 of what was supposed to be our parents' equity, and did what with it? Gambled it? Spent it on that SUV in the driveway? Where did it go?" He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to explain myself to you. You've always been jealous of me, Rachel. Always bitter that I had a family, a life, while you were stuck in your sad little apartment." The words were meant to hurt, meant to deflect, but they just sounded desperate. "Sit down," my father said quietly. "Brandon, sit down right now." My brother looked at Dad like he'd been slapped. In our family, Dad rarely raised his voice, rarely gave direct orders. He was the peacekeeper, the soft one, the man who smoothed everything over with a joke or a glass of wine. But now his face was set in hard lines I'd never seen before. Brandon sat. Kristen had gone very still beside him, her hand over her mouth. Madison was playing with her napkin, oblivious. Tyler was staring at his plate, old enough to sense the tension but young enough not to fully understand it. My mother finally spoke, her voice icy. "Rachel, I think you've made your point. We can discuss this after dinner." "No," I said flatly. "We're discussing it now. You don't get to sweep this under the rug like everything else. You don't get to protect him while throwing me away." "I'm not throwing you away," she snapped. "You're being dramatic." "Am I? You told me I wasn't welcome here anymore. You said I was difficult. You made me feel like I was the problem, like I was somehow failing this family by existing. And the whole time, the entire time, I was the only thing keeping this house from foreclosure." My father cleared his throat, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his wine glass. "Rachel, we never asked you to carry that burden alone." "Yes, you did," I said, my voice breaking just slightly. "Maybe not in words. But you let it happen. You let it become normal. You let me pay and pay and pay, and never once did you ask if I was okay. If I needed help. If I had dreams of my own that I was sacrificing. You just took what I gave and acted like it was your right." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the kids had gone quiet. My mother's face was flushed, her jaw tight. "Your father lost his hours at work," she said finally. "We were desperate. What were we supposed to do? Ask Brandon to contribute," I shot back. "Stop enabling him. Stop pretending he's some kind of golden child who can do no wrong while treating me like I'm invisible." She flinched. "I never treated you like you were invisible. You just never needed anything. That's the problem right there," I said, leaning forward. "You think because I didn't fall apart, because I held it together, that meant I didn't need anything. I needed parents who saw me. I needed a family that valued me for more than what I could provide. I needed to feel like I mattered." Her eyes were wet now, but I couldn't tell if it was from anger or actual remorse. "You matter," she said weakly. Do I? Because 2 months ago you told me to stay away. You cut me out without a second thought. And the only reason we're having this conversation now is because the mortgage payment stopped and suddenly I'm useful again. Brandon tried to interject. Rachel, come on, this is getting out of hand. No, I said, rounding on him. You don't get to minimize this. You took $55,000 that I ultimately paid for. Money that could have gone toward my future, my life, and you pissed it away on nothing. And then you had the audacity to message me asking why I missed Tyler's soccer game? The hypocrisy is staggering. What was it for? Kristen asked suddenly, her voice cold and precise. Brandon, what was the money for? He wouldn't look at her. There was a business deal. Some guys I knew, they had this tech startup thing. It was supposed to be a sure thing. Gambling, my father said heavily. You gambled with $55,000. It wasn't gambling, it was an investment. It was gambling, Dad repeated louder now. And you lied to us. You told us you needed help with a down payment on a bigger place for the kids. You said it was for their future. Brandon's face crumpled slightly. I thought it would work out. I thought I could pay it back before anyone noticed. But someone did notice, I said. I noticed. I've been paying the increased mortgage payment from that refinance for 4 years, Brandon. 4 years of an extra $200 a month. That's almost $10,000 right there. Money that went to cover your mistake. Kristen stood up, her movements sharp and controlled. She picked up Madison and held out her hand to Tyler. We're leaving. Brandon looked up at her, panic flashing across his face. Chris, come on, we can talk about this. We'll talk about it at home, she said. Away from this. But she looked at me before she left, and her expression was complicated. Angry, yes, but also something that might have been understanding. She shepherded the kids toward the door. Brandon followed, trying to reason with her in low, urgent tones. The front door opened and closed. Through the window, I could see them standing by the SUV, Kristen's posture rigid, Brandon gesturing helplessly. Then they got in and drove away. The dining room felt cavernous without them. The food had gone cold. The candles my mother had lit were burning down to nubs. Everything looked wrong now, staged and false. My father was the first to break the silence. I didn't know about the LLC, he said quietly. I didn't know he took that much. Mom did, I said, looking at her. Didn't you? She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. He was in trouble. He owed people money. We thought if we helped him, he could get back on his feet. So you refinanced the house I was paying for, took out equity, gave it to him, and then just kept letting me pay the new higher amount without telling me why. When you put it like that, it sounds worse than it was. That's because it is worse than it was, I said. Mom, you didn't just enable him. You sacrificed me to do it. You made a choice about whose future mattered more, and it wasn't mine. She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was defensive anger, not remorse. You always had it together, Rachel. You never needed us. Brandon needs help. He's struggling. He's always struggling, I said, exhausted suddenly. Because you never let him face consequences. You never made him grow up. And in the process, you taught me that being responsible means being taken for granted. My father rubbed his face with both hands. What do you want from us, Rachel? What outcome are you looking for here? I want acknowledgement, I said. I want you to admit what you did. I want you to see that you used me, that you prioritized Brandon over me consistently, that you made me feel worthless while taking everything I had to give. And I want the payments to stop coming from me. The house is yours. The mortgage is yours. Figure it out. But you won't foreclose, my mother said. And it wasn't a question. It was a statement, an assumption, an expectation. I stared at her. The entitlement in that sentence, the sheer audacity of it, took my breath away. Watch me, I said. What? You heard me. I'm done. I'm done paying. I'm done sacrificing. I'm done being the dependable one while being treated like I don't matter. If you lose the house, that's on you. Not me. Rachel, you can't be serious, my father said, his voice rising in panic. This is our home. It was my money, I said. $171,000 that could have changed my life. That could have been a house of my own, retirement savings, travel, anything. But instead, it went to keeping you afloat while you gave my brother $55,000 to waste. So yes, Dad, I'm serious. Deadly serious. My mother's face had gone hard. If you do this, she said slowly, don't expect to be part of this family anymore. And there it was. The threat. The ultimatum. The final play in a lifetime of manipulation. I stood up, gathering my folder, my purse. I haven't been part of this family for a long time, I said. I've just been a bank account with a familiar face. But now the account is closed. You're on your own. I walked toward the door. My father called after me. Rachel, please. We can work this out. We can figure something out. There's nothing to figure out, I said without turning around. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool evening air. Behind me, I heard my mother say something sharp to my father, heard his voice rise in response. The sound of my family fracturing echoed out into the quiet suburban street. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing hard. My whole body was shaking, adrenaline and emotion coursing through me in waves. I had done it. I had said everything I needed to say. I had burned it all down. And I felt lighter than I had in years. I drove home in a daze, the Phoenix streets passing by in a blur of strip malls and traffic lights. When I got back to my apartment in Tempe, I sat in the parking lot for a long time just staring at the building. My small, rented, supposedly sad little apartment. The place Brandon had mocked. The place my mother had implied wasn't good enough. But it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every plant on the windowsill, every choice about what went where. Mine. Not bought with lies or guilt or stolen equity. Just mine. I finally went inside and immediately called Jessica. She answered on the first ring. How did it go? I told her everything. The confrontation, Brandon's face when I exposed the LLC, Kristen leaving with the kids, my mother's final threat. When I finished, Jessica was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm proud of you. I wasn't expecting that. I laughed, a shaky sound. Proud? I just nuked my entire family on Thanksgiving. You told the truth, she corrected. You stood up for yourself. You set a boundary. That takes guts, Rachel. Most people would have just kept paying, kept suffering, kept silent. But you didn't. So yeah, I'm proud of you. I felt tears prick my eyes. What if I made a mistake? What if I should have handled it differently? There's no right way to handle being used by your own family, Jess said gently. You did what you needed to do. Now you get to decide what comes next. And whatever you decide, I've got your back. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I kept replaying moments from dinner. The look on Brandon's face. My father's panic. My mother's cold ultimatum. Part of me felt guilty, felt like maybe I had been too harsh, too dramatic. But a louder part of me felt vindicated. They needed to hear it. They needed to face what they'd done. I checked my phone out of habit and found a text from an unknown number. It was Kristen. I'm sorry for what my husband did. I didn't know about any of it. We're going to counseling and he's going to make this right somehow. You deserved better from all of them. I stared at that message for a long time before typing back a simple, thank you. It wasn't much, but it was something. An acknowledgement. An apology, even if it came from someone who wasn't directly responsible. It was more than my parents had given me. Over the next few days, the fallout continued. My father called twice. I didn't answer, but he left voicemails. The first was rambling and desperate, talking about family and forgiveness and how we could work through this. The second was shorter, quieter. He said he'd been looking at the documents I left behind, really looking at them. He said he hadn't realized how much I'd given, how long it had been. He said he was sorry. He said he understood if I needed space. He didn't say anything about my mother. She didn't call at all. Brandon sent a long email on Monday. It was full of excuses and justifications, paragraphs about how hard his life had been, how much pressure he was under, how the investment really had seemed legitimate at the time. He said he never meant for me to get hurt. He said he'd pay me back somehow eventually. He said I was right to be angry but wrong to air it all out in front of everyone. Even in his apology, he was blaming me for the method of exposure rather than taking responsibility for the actions that needed exposing. I deleted the email without responding. Marcus called on Tuesday to check in. I told him about Thanksgiving, about the confrontation, about the aftermath. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished he said, "You did the right thing. They need to understand there are consequences." "What happens now?" I asked. "To the house, I mean. If they don't pay?" They'll get a 90-day notice before foreclosure proceedings begin. They might be able to work out a payment plan with the bank, or they could sell and downsize. Either way, it's their problem to solve, not yours. It felt strange hearing someone say that out loud. Not my problem. For 10 years, their problems had been my problems automatically, without question. The idea that I could just step back and let them handle their own lives felt both liberating and terrifying. What if they really do lose the house, I said. Then they lose the house, Marcus said simply. Rachel, you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. At some point, they have to take responsibility for their own choices. And so do you. Taking responsibility for your choices means deciding you're worth more than this. Are you worth more than this? Yes, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. I am. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went looking at houses. Not seriously, not with any real intention of buying yet, but just to see what was possible. Just to imagine a different future. Jessica came with me, playing the role of enthusiastic co-conspirator. We drove around Chandler and Gilbert, looking at modest single-family homes in quiet neighborhoods. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed success, just solid houses with yards and potential. We walked through a 3-bedroom in Chandler with dated fixtures but good bones. The backyard had a lemon tree and a covered patio. Standing there in the afternoon sun, I could picture it. I could see myself living there, planting a garden, hosting dinners for friends who actually valued me, making it mine in a way I'd never been able to make the apartment mine. What do you think? Jessica asked. I think it's possible, I said. I think maybe I could actually do this. You could definitely do this, she said. You've got good credit, steady income, and as of last month, an extra $1,200 in your budget every month. I laughed. Felt good to laugh. When we got back to my apartment that evening, there was an envelope taped to my door. No postage, no return address, just my name written in my father's handwriting. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note on yellow legal paper. Rachel, I know this doesn't come close to what you've given us. I know money can't fix what's broken. But I wanted you to know that I see you. I see what you did, what you sacrificed. Your mother and I are going to sell the house. We've already talked to a realtor. We'll downsize to something we can afford on our own. Brandon is going to have to figure out his own way. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible. You were never invisible to me, even when I didn't show it. I hope someday you can forgive us. But I understand if you can't. Love, Dad. I read the note 3 times, standing there in my doorway. $5,000. It was something. It was more than nothing. But it wasn't an apology from my mother. It wasn't Brandon taking real responsibility. It was one parent trying in the only way he knew how to acknowledge a decade of taking me for granted. I put the check on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to send it back, to make a point. But another part of me, the practical part that had kept me afloat all these years, knew that every dollar counted. If I was really going to buy a house, I'd need every bit of help I could get. Even if that help came from the people who'd hurt me. I deposited the check on Monday. That same day, I got a message from Marcus. The bank had contacted my parents about their delinquent account. They'd been given options, payment plans, or short sale possibilities. He'd heard through his connections in the mortgage industry that they were moving forward with selling. It's really happening, I told Jessica over coffee that afternoon. They're selling the house. How do you feel about that? She asked carefully. Sad, I admitted. But also relieved. Like maybe this is what they needed. A reset. A chance to live within their means instead of relying on me to subsidize everything. And Brandon? He's Kristen's problem now. Jess grinned. I like Kristen. She seems like she doesn't take any crap. She doesn't, I agreed. I think he's finally met his match. As December approached, I found myself settling into a new normal. Work continued, steady and uncomplicated. I picked up extra shifts not because I had to anymore, but because I wanted to. I was saving aggressively now, building up a down payment fund, imagining the house I'd seen in Chandler with the lemon tree. I started running in the mornings, something I'd never had energy for before. It was like all the weight I'd been carrying had lifted, and suddenly there was room in my life for things that were just for me. My father called once more in early December. We had a brief, awkward conversation. He told me they'd accepted an offer on the house, pending inspection. They were looking at condos in a retirement community in Surprise. Smaller, manageable, affordable. Your mother is having a hard time with it, he admitted. She feels like we failed. You didn't fail, I said carefully. You just made choices that weren't sustainable. Now you're making different choices. That's not failure. That's adaptation. There was a long pause. She won't apologize, you know. She thinks she was protecting the family. I know, I said. And that's something she'll have to live with. We said goodbye shortly after that. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just two people acknowledging a complicated reality. I didn't know if we'd ever have a real relationship again. But at least we were being honest. And honestly, honesty was all I'd ever wanted. Christmas came and went without the usual foster family gathering. I spent it with Jessica and her family, eating tamales and playing board games with her nieces and nephews. It was loud and chaotic and joyful, and nobody expected anything from me except to show up and be present. It was the best Christmas I'd had in years. On New Year's Eve, I got a text from Brandon. I'm in a 12-step program. Part of it is making amends. I know I can't pay you back all at once, but I'm going to try. I'm getting a second job. Kristen and I are working things out. I'm sorry, Rachel. I really am. I read it twice and then responded. I'm glad you're getting help. That's a good step. But my forgiveness isn't something you're entitled to. You'll have to earn it if it ever comes. And it might not. I understand, he wrote back. That's fair. It was more than fair. It was the truth. And after a decade of living in half-truths and silent sacrifices, the truth felt like oxygen. By mid-January, I had saved enough for a serious down payment. Marcus helped me get pre-approved for a mortgage, and this time the only name on the application was mine. The only income reported was what I actually made. The only signature would be my own. I put in an offer on the house in Chandler with the lemon tree. It was accepted on a Friday afternoon. And when I got the call, I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot and cried. Not sad tears. Not angry tears. Just release. Pure, overwhelming release. I called Jessica. I got the house, I said through tears. You did it, she screamed. You actually did it. I did it, I repeated and started laughing. I bought a house with my own money in my own name, and nobody can take it from me. That's the dream, Jess said. Her voice thick with emotion. That's the whole dream. The closing was scheduled for late February. In the weeks leading up to it, I started packing up my apartment, sorting through a decade of accumulated stuff. I found things I'd forgotten I owned, mementos from a life that felt very far away now. A photo from a family Christmas 5 years ago, everyone smiling, everyone pretending. I looked at it for a long time and then threw it away. I didn't need to carry that anymore. Moving day came on a Saturday that was unseasonably warm, even for Phoenix. Jessica and Marcus both showed up to help, along with a few coworkers from the clinic. We loaded boxes into a rental truck, carried furniture down narrow stairs, laughed at how much stuff I'd managed to fit into such a small space. When we pulled up to the house in Chandler, my house, I sat in the truck for a moment just looking at it. The stucco was a soft beige, the desert landscaping simple but well maintained, and there in the backyard visible from the driveway, was the lemon tree, heavy with fruit. This is really mine, I said out loud. Jessica, sitting beside me, squeezed my shoulder. Every inch of it. Every single inch. We spent the day moving boxes, assembling furniture, and transforming empty rooms into something that resembled a home. Marcus hung curtain rods while Jessica organized the kitchen, and by the time the sun started to set, casting golden light through the windows, the place actually looked lived in. I stood in the middle of my new living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and mismatched furniture, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that depended on keeping everyone else happy, but the solid kind that came from knowing I had built this with my own hands, my own choices, my own money. Nobody could take this from me because nobody had given it to me. I had given it to myself. That night, after everyone left, I sat on my back patio with a glass of wine and looked up at the stars. The neighborhood was quiet, just the distant sound of someone's television and the rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. I thought about my parents, probably settling into their new condo in Surprise, adjusting to a smaller space and a tighter budget. I thought about Brandon working 2 jobs, trying to piece together a marriage and a sense of responsibility he should have developed decades ago. I thought about my mother, who still hadn't called, still hadn't apologized, probably never would. And I realized something important. I didn't need her apology anymore. I had spent so long waiting for acknowledgement, for validation, for someone in my family to see me and say thank you, you mattered, what you did was extraordinary. But I didn't need them to say it because I already knew it. I had proved it to myself. I had survived their neglect, their manipulation, their conditional love, and I had come out the other side stronger. The apology would have been nice, sure. It would have provided closure in a neat narrative way. But life wasn't a neat narrative, and some people never learned to say sorry. That was their loss, not mine. The weeks that followed were full of small joys I hadn't anticipated. Choosing paint colors for the bedroom. Planting herbs in terracotta pots on the patio. Learning which neighbors were friendly and which kept to themselves. There was a couple 3 houses down, Elena and David, who brought over cookies the first week and invited me to a neighborhood barbecue. There was an elderly man named Mr. Patterson who walked his dog past my house every morning and always waved. These were people who knew nothing about my history, nothing about the family drama or the money or the decade of secret sacrifice. To them I was just Rachel, the new neighbor with the lemon tree. And that anonymity felt like freedom. I could be anyone here. I could be exactly who I wanted to be without the weight of old expectations pressing down on me. I started hosting small gatherings, nothing fancy, just Jessica and a few people from work, sitting on the patio with cheap wine and takeout. We'd talk about nothing important, television shows and weekend plans, and the weird customer someone dealt with at the grocery store. Simple, easy conversation that didn't require me to perform or prove anything. One evening in early March, Jessica and I were sitting outside watching the sunset when she asked, "Do you miss them? My family?" I considered the question carefully. "I miss the idea of them," I said finally. "I miss what they could have been, what I wanted them to be. But the reality of who they actually are? No, I don't miss that." "Fair enough," she said. "For what it's worth, I think they're idiots for not fighting harder to keep you in their lives." I smiled. "Thanks, Jess." She clinked her wine glass against mine. "To new beginnings and lemon trees." "To new beginnings," I echoed. In April, I got an email from my father. It was longer than his usual messages, more thoughtful. He wrote about how strange it was living in the condo, how much smaller everything felt, how your mother still wasn't sleeping well. He wrote about running into an old friend at the grocery store who asked about me, and how he hadn't known what to say because he didn't actually know what was going on in my life anymore. He wrote that he was proud of me for buying the house, that he'd driven by it once just to see it, that it looked perfect. For me. He didn't ask me to forgive them. He didn't ask me to come back. He just wrote like a father who missed his daughter but understood why there was distance between them now. It was the most honest thing he'd ever written to me. I read it 3 times and then wrote back. A short email, nothing profound. Just an update about the house, about work, about how the lemon tree was producing more fruit than I knew what to do with. I told him I was doing well, that I was happy, that I hoped he and Mom were adjusting okay. I didn't say I forgave them. I didn't say I wanted to rebuild our relationship. I just left the door open a crack, enough to let a little light through, but not enough to let all the old dysfunction come flooding back in. His response came the next day. "Thank you for writing back. That means more than you know." We exchanged a few more emails over the following weeks. Always brief, always surface level. He'd tell me about a movie he watched or a project he was working on in the condo. I'd tell him about a difficult patient at work or a new restaurant Jessica and I tried. It wasn't deep. It wasn't healing all the wounds. But it was something. A thread of connection, thin but present. My mother never reached out. According to my father's occasional updates, she was angry about the move, resentful about the smaller space, bitter about what she saw as my betrayal. She had constructed a narrative where I was the villain, the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family in their time of need. Never mind that their time of need had lasted 10 years. Never mind that I had sacrificed my own future to sustain theirs. In her version of events, she was the victim. I had made peace with the fact that she might never see it differently. Some people were so invested in their own victimhood that they couldn't acknowledge the harm they'd caused others. My mother was one of those people. And that was sad, truly, but it wasn't my responsibility to fix. I had spent enough of my life trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix. In May, Kristen reached out. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just the 2 of us. I was hesitant at first, unsure what she wanted, but curiosity won out. We met at a place in Scottsdale, halfway between her house and mine. She looked tired but put together, her hair pulled back, minimal makeup, the kind of appearance that suggested she was holding things together through sheer force of will. She ordered a latte and got straight to the point. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for what you did at Thanksgiving." I must have looked confused because she continued quickly. "Brandon needed that wake-up call. He'd been coasting on charm and excuses his whole life, and your family enabled every bit of it. But you didn't. You held up a mirror and made him look at what he'd become. It nearly destroyed us, honestly. We almost divorced. But instead we went to therapy. Real therapy, not just a couple sessions to check a box. And he's actually trying now. Really trying. He's working 2 jobs, he's in his program, he's being honest with me for the first time maybe ever. So thank you. Even though I know that wasn't your intention, even though you were just standing up for yourself, it ended up saving my marriage." I didn't know what to say to that. "I'm glad it helped," I finally managed. "But you should know I didn't do it for him." "I know," she said. "You did it for you. And that's exactly why it worked." We talked for another hour. She told me about the kids, about how they were adjusting to their father being around more and actually present instead of just physically there but mentally checked out. She told me about the financial counseling they were doing, learning to live within their means, building a budget that didn't rely on handouts or schemes. She told me that Brandon had written me several letters he'd never sent because his therapist told him not to burden me with his guilt. "That's probably wise," I said. "He needs to sit with it. Learn from it. Not just dump it on you for absolution." "Exactly what his therapist said," Kristen replied with a slight smile. Before we parted ways, she hugged me. It was brief but genuine. "If you ever want to see the kids," she said, "they ask about you sometimes. Tyler especially. He doesn't really understand what happened. Just that Aunt Rachel doesn't come around anymore." "I'll think about it," I said honestly. "But I'm not ready yet." "I understand," she said. "Whenever you are, if you ever are, the door's open." I appreciated that. The lack of pressure, the acknowledgement that I got to set the terms. It was more respect than I'd gotten from my actual family in years. As I drove home that day, I thought about Tyler and Madison. They were innocent in all of this, collateral damage in an adult conflict they hadn't created. Maybe someday I'd be ready to have a relationship with them again. But not yet. Not while the wounds were still fresh. Summer in Phoenix was brutal as always, temperatures soaring above 110, the kind of heat that made you question why humans had decided to build a city in the desert at all. I spent most of my time indoors with the air conditioning running, venturing out only in the early mornings or late evenings when the temperature dropped to merely unbearable instead of actively dangerous. My lemon tree remarkably thrived. I learned how to care for it properly, when to water, how to fertilize, when to prune. I made lemonade from the fruit, gave bags of lemons to neighbors and coworkers, froze lemon juice in ice cube trays for future use. There was something deeply satisfying about having this living thing that I was responsible for, that rewarded my care with tangible abundance. It was the opposite of my relationship with my family, where years of care had yielded nothing but resentment and expectation. The lemon tree just grew. It just gave. It asked for water and sunlight and gave back fruit. Simple. Honest. Fair. In July, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, an actual physical letter, handwritten on cream-colored stationery. The return address was my parents' condo in Surprise. The handwriting was my mother's, that careful script she'd learned in Catholic school decades ago. I held the letter for a long time before opening it, trying to steel myself for whatever was inside. Accusation, probably. Or guilt dressed up as concern. But when I finally opened it and read, I found something I hadn't expected. An apology. It wasn't a great apology. It was full of qualifications and explanations, context that was meant to soften the blow of her mistakes. But buried in all the justifications were actual words of remorse. "I was wrong to tell you that you weren't welcome. I was wrong to take your help for granted. I was wrong to prioritize Brandon's needs over acknowledging your sacrifices. I still don't fully understand how we got here, how things got so broken between us, but I know that I played a part in it. I'm sorry, Rachel. I'm sorry for making you feel invisible. You were never invisible. You were just so strong that I thought you didn't need me. I realize now that everyone needs to feel needed, to feel valued. I failed you in that. I'm not asking you to forgive me, not right away. I'm just asking you to know that I see it now. I see what you did. I see what it cost you. And I'm sorry. I read the letter 3 times, looking for the catch, the manipulation, the twist that would reveal this was just another play for sympathy or money. But I couldn't find it. It seemed genuine as my mother was capable of being. I set the letter down on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to crumple it up, to reject this olive branch the way she'd rejected me. But another part of me, the part that was tired of carrying anger like a stone in my chest, wanted to take it at face value. Wanted to believe that maybe, finally, she understood. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it for a week, let it percolate, talked it through with Jessica over several glasses of wine. What do you want, she asked me. From her, from your family, from all of this. What would actually make you feel like it was resolved? I thought about that. I want them to be okay without me, I said finally. I want them to figure out their own lives, solve their own problems, stand on their own feet. And I want to live my life without guilt, without obligation, without feeling like I owe them something just because we share DNA. Can you have that and also have some kind of relationship with them? Maybe, I said. A small one. Carefully boundaried. But it would take time. Years probably. And it would require them to respect those boundaries, which historically they've been terrible at. So maybe not. Maybe the healthiest thing is to just let it stay distant. Jessica nodded. Either way is okay. You get to decide. Nobody else gets to tell you what healing is supposed to look like. That helped hearing someone say that. Because I've been feeling guilty about not immediately embracing my mother's apology, about not rushing to rebuild what had been broken. But Jessica was right. I got to decide what this looked like. I got to control the pace and the parameters. That power, that autonomy was mine now. I'd fought for it. I'd earned it. In August, I finally wrote back to my mother. I kept it brief. Thank you for your letter. I appreciate the apology. I'm not ready for regular contact yet, but I'm not closing the door permanently either. I need time and space to build my own life without the weight of family expectations. I hope you can understand that. If you can respect that boundary, maybe we can find a new kind of relationship eventually. But it has to be different than it was. I can't go back to being invisible while I'm holding everyone else up. I won't do that again. I mailed the letter and felt a sense of completion. Not closure exactly, because nothing about this situation was truly closed. But completion of a chapter. I had said what needed to be said. I had set my boundary. What happened next was up to them. September brought cooler temperatures, and the start of a new season in every sense. I got a promotion at work, a raise that wasn't huge but was meaningful. I started taking a pottery class on Thursday evenings, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was drowning in other people's problems. I was terrible at pottery, my bowls lopsided and my vases crooked, but I loved it anyway. Loved the feel of the clay, the meditative quality of shaping something with my hands, the permission to be bad at something without it mattering. I went on a few dates, nothing serious, just coffee or dinner with men I met through friends or apps. None of them turned into anything lasting, but that was okay. I was rediscovering what I liked, what I wanted, who I was when I wasn't defined by my role in my family. That process couldn't be rushed. One evening in late September, almost a year after that devastating Thanksgiving dinner, I was sitting on my patio reading when my phone rang. It was my father. We'd been exchanging occasional emails but hadn't actually spoken by phone in months. I answered. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, honey," he said, and his voice sounded warm, tentative. "How are you?" "I'm good," I said. "Really good, actually." "I'm glad to hear that. Listen, I wanted to tell you something. Your mother and I have been doing some therapy. Not couples therapy exactly, more like family systems therapy. Trying to understand patterns where things went wrong with you and Brandon, how we ended up here." "Oh," I said, surprised. "That's good. That's really good." "It's been hard," he admitted. "Facing things we didn't want to look at. But it's been helpful too. We're learning a lot. About ourselves, about how we parented, about the damage we did without meaning to." There was a pause. "I wanted you to know that we're trying. We can't undo the past, but we're trying to be better. Not for you necessarily. You don't owe us anything. But for ourselves. Because we don't want to be those people anymore. The people who take their kids for granted." I felt emotion rising in my throat. "Thank you for telling me that," I managed. I know you don't owe me forgiveness, he continued. I know trust isn't something we can demand or expect. But if you ever want to talk, really talk, I'm here. And I'm listening now in a way I wasn't before. Okay, I said. I'll keep that in mind. We talked for a few more minutes. Surface level stuff about the weather and his golf game in my pottery class. When we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness feeling something I hadn't felt toward my family in a long time. Hope. Not the naive kind that thought everything could be fixed with a few conversations, but the cautious kind that recognized people were capable of change, even if that change came slowly and imperfectly. I didn't know if my relationship with my parents would ever be truly healed. I didn't know if I'd ever feel safe enough to let them fully back into my life. But I knew they were trying. And that was more than I'd had a year ago. As October arrived and the anniversary of my mother's devastating phone call approached, I found myself taking stock of everything that had changed. I had a house that was mine, a job I was good at, friends who valued me, hobbies that brought me joy, and a life that didn't revolve around managing other people's crises. I had boundaries that I enforced without guilt. I had self-respect that couldn't be borrowed or given away. I had learned the difference between helping and enabling, between love and obligation, between family and toxicity. Most importantly, I had learned that I was enough just as I was without needing to sacrifice myself to prove my worth. On the actual anniversary of that phone call, Jessica insisted on taking me out to celebrate. Celebrate what? I asked. Your Independence Day, she said. The day you got kicked out of a family that didn't deserve you and started building a life that did. We went to a nice restaurant in downtown Phoenix, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list I couldn't pronounce half of. We ordered too much food and laughed too loud and toasted to second chances and lemon trees and the courage it takes to walk away from people you love when they're hurting you. At one point, Jessica raised her glass and said, "You know what the best part of this whole story is?" What? You won. Not by getting revenge, not by making them suffer, but by building something beautiful out of the ashes. You created a life that's so full and good that their approval doesn't even matter anymore. That's the ultimate victory. I clinked my glass against hers, feeling the truth of her words settle into my bones. You're right, I said. I did win. Not because I destroyed them, but because I saved myself. And that, ultimately, was what mattered most. As we left the restaurant that night, walking into the cool desert evening with the city lights glowing around us, I felt something profound. Gratitude. Not for what had happened, not for the betrayal or the pain or the years of being taken for granted, but gratitude for what it had forced me to become. Stronger, clearer, more certain of my own value. I had been broken down and built back up, and the person I'd built was someone I actually liked, someone I was proud to be. The months that followed were uneventful in the best possible way. I fell into rhythms and routines that were mine alone. Morning coffee on the patio, evening walks around the neighborhood, weekend projects around the house, painting a bedroom or installing new light fixtures or planting flowers in the front yard. I hosted Thanksgiving at my place that year, a small gathering with Jessica and Marcus and a few coworkers. We ate too much and played board games and nobody mentioned my family or the drama of the previous year. It was exactly what I needed. Uncomplicated joy, simple connection, easy laughter. In December, I received a Christmas card from my parents. Inside was a photo of them in front of their condo, smiling but looking older somehow. The message inside was brief. Wishing you peace and happiness this holiday season. We're thinking of you. Love, Mom and Dad. I put it on my refrigerator, not prominently displayed but present. A small acknowledgement that they existed, that we were still connected even if that connection was thin and careful. Brandon sent a card too with a longer note. He'd been sober for 8 months. He'd paid off half his debt. He'd been promoted at one of his jobs. He wrote that he thought about me often, about what I'd said at Thanksgiving, about how right I'd been. He wrote that he hoped someday I could meet him for coffee. No expectations, just a conversation between siblings who'd lost their way but were trying to find it again. I appreciated the note but didn't respond. Maybe I would someday. Maybe I wouldn't. Either way was okay. As the new year began, I made a resolution. Not to forgive my family, not to rebuild what had been broken, but simply to keep moving forward. To keep building this life I'd created. This existence that was wholly and completely mine. To keep setting boundaries. To keep choosing myself. to keep believing that I was worth the space I took up in the world. Because the truth was, I had spent too many years making myself small, trying to fit into spaces that weren't designed for me, contorting myself to meet expectations that were impossible and unfair. I had apologized for my existence by trying to be useful, valuable, necessary, but I didn't need to do that anymore. I was already valuable simply by virtue of being human. I didn't need to earn love through sacrifice. Real love didn't require that. Real love saw you, valued you, cherished you just as you were. In February, a year after I'd moved into my house, I threw myself a party. Nothing fancy, just an excuse to gather the people who'd supported me through the hardest year of my life. Jessica and Marcus were there, of course. Coworkers from the clinic. Neighbors I'd gotten to know. Elena and David from down the street. Mr. Patterson and his wife. We crowded into my small house, spilling out onto the patio, eating potluck dishes and drinking cheap wine and celebrating nothing in particular except the fact that we were all there together, choosing to show up for each other. At one point, Jessica pulled me aside. "Look at this," she said, gesturing to the crowd of people laughing and talking. "Look at what you built. Not just the house, the life, the community. You did this. You created this from nothing." I looked around at these people, most of whom I'd only known for a year, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "You're right," I said. "I did do this, and I'm really proud of that." "You should be," she said, hugging me tight. "You should be so damn proud." As the party wound down and people started leaving, offering hugs and thanks and promises to do it again soon, I stood in my doorway watching them go. The night was cool, stars visible despite the city lights, and I felt more content than I could remember feeling in my entire adult life. This was it. This was what I'd been working toward without fully realizing it. Not revenge against the people who'd hurt me. Not vindication or validation from the family who'd taken me for granted. Just this. A life that was mine. A home that was mine. Relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than obligation and expectation. Freedom to be exactly who I was without apology or explanation. It wasn't perfect. I still had moments of sadness, times when I missed the fantasy of what my family could have been. I still occasionally felt lonely, wished I had siblings I could actually talk to or parents who'd been there for me in the ways I needed. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between, replaced by an increasing sense of peace. One evening in early spring, I was picking lemons from my tree when a car pulled up in front of my house. I looked up to see my father stepping out, looking uncertain and nervous. He stood at the curb for a moment, clearly unsure if he should come closer. I set down my basket of lemons and walked toward him. "Hi, Dad." "Hi, Rachel," he said. "I hope this is okay, me just showing up. I probably should have called first." "It's fine," I said. "What brings you by?" He glanced back at his car, then at me. "I was in the area and I wanted to see your place. Really see it. You've mentioned it in your emails, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes." I hesitated, then nodded toward the house. "Want to come in?" His face lit up with relief. "I'd love to." I gave him a tour, brief and factual, pointing out the rooms and the improvements I'd made. He admired the lemon tree, the pottery bowl I'd made that sat crooked on the kitchen counter, the photos I'd hung of friends and places I'd traveled. When we settled on the patio with glasses of lemonade, he looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen from him, pride mixed with regret. "You've done well for yourself," he said quietly. "This place, this life, it's exactly what you deserve." "Thank you," I said. "It took me a long time to get here." "I know it did," he said. "And I'm sorry we made it harder than it needed to be." We talked for over an hour. Really talked, maybe for the first time in my adult life. He told me about the therapy he and my mother were doing, about the things they were learning about themselves and their patterns of behavior. He told me about conversations they'd had about me, about finally understanding the magnitude of what I'd done for them and how little they'd given back. He told me my mother was still struggling to fully accept her role in what happened, but that she was trying. Slowly, imperfectly, but trying. I told him about my life now. The promotion at work. The pottery class. The friendships I'd built. The contentment I felt living alone. Being responsible only for myself. I told him I was dating someone casually. Nothing serious yet. But it was nice to explore that part of my life without feeling guilty about spending time or money on myself. I told him I was happy. And I meant it. Before he left, he hugged me. It was awkward at first, neither of us quite sure how to bridge the physical distance that had grown between us. But then he held on a little tighter and said, "I love you, Rachel. I know I haven't shown it the way I should have, but I do." "I love you too, Dad," I said. And I did. Not in the uncomplicated way I'd loved him as a child, but in the more complex way you love someone who's hurt you but is genuinely trying to do better. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to make the present bearable and the future possible. After he left, I sat on my patio and watched the sun set. The sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, the kind of sunset that made you understand why people endured the brutal Phoenix summers. Beautiful things often came with a cost. The question was whether that cost was worth paying. For my family, the cost had been too high for too long. But now, with distance and boundaries and a life that was fully mine, maybe there was room for something smaller. Something manageable. Not the all-consuming family dynamic of before, but maybe occasional dinners. Maybe phone calls on birthdays. Maybe a careful, limited relationship that didn't require me to sacrifice myself to maintain it. Or maybe not. Maybe the distance would remain. Maybe I'd decide that even a small relationship was more than I wanted to give. And that would be okay too. Because the most important thing I'd learned through all of this was that I got to choose. I got to decide who had access to my life, my time, my energy. I got to set the terms. And if those terms didn't work for someone else, that was their problem, not mine. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, I gathered my basket of lemons and went inside. Tomorrow I'd make another batch of lemonade. I'd go to work and come home to this house that was mine. I'd water my plants and call Jessica and maybe sign up for another class drawing this time, why not? I'd live my life on my own terms, beholden to no one, apologizing for nothing, taking up exactly the space I deserved. Because I had learned the hardest lesson of all. That sometimes loving yourself means disappointing people who expect you to love them more than you love yourself. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who need you but don't value you. That sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let other people face the consequences of their own choices. Even when those people are family. I had paid my parents' mortgage for 10 years. I had kept their house standing, their lives stable, their problems at bay. And in return, they had made me feel invisible until the money stopped coming. That was the truth, stark and painful and impossible to deny. But here was another truth equally important. I had survived. I had rebuilt. I had created something beautiful from the wreckage. And nobody, not my mother with her conditional love, not my brother with his endless needs, not even my father with his well-meaning but inadequate efforts, nobody could take that away from me. This life was mine. This peace was mine. This future, whatever it held, was mine to shape and claim and inhabit fully. And that finally was enough. Spring turned to summer, and with it came the kind of growth I hadn't anticipated. Not just in my garden, where the lemon tree continued its generous production and the herbs I'd planted flourished in the Arizona heat, but in myself. I started volunteering at a financial literacy nonprofit on weekends, teaching basic budgeting and money management to young adults. It was Jessica's idea, actually. She'd said one Saturday over brunch, "You know what you went through, all that financial manipulation, maybe you could help other people avoid it. Or at least recognize it when it's happening." So I signed up, went through their training program, and found myself standing in front of a classroom of 20-somethings talking about boundaries and financial independence, and the difference between helping someone and enabling their dysfunction. The first time I told my story, anonymized but essentially true, I saw recognition flash across several faces. After class, a young woman approached me. Her name was Daniela, and she was 23, working 2 jobs while her boyfriend lived rent-free in her apartment and contributed nothing. "He says he's looking for work," she told me, tears in her eyes. "But it's been 8 months. And whenever I bring it up, he makes me feel guilty, like I'm being unsupportive." "What you're describing isn't a partnership," I told her gently. "It's parasitic. And the longer you allow it, the harder it becomes to break free." Over the following weeks, Daniela came to every class. She asked questions, took notes, and eventually, she told me she'd asked her boyfriend to leave. It was hard, she said. He cried. He promised to change. He said I was abandoning him when he needed me most. But I remembered what you said about how people who really want to change will show you through actions, not promises. and his actions had shown me everything I needed to know. I felt a surge of pride hearing that, not in myself necessarily, but in her. In her courage to choose herself over someone else's comfort. It reminded me that my story, painful as it had been, had value beyond my own healing. It could serve as a cautionary tale, a roadmap, a source of strength for others facing similar situations. Teaching those classes became one of the most meaningful parts of my week. I looked forward to Saturday mornings, to the discussions we'd have about family obligations and cultural expectations, and the guilt that came with setting boundaries. Many of my students were first-generation Americans, caught between traditional values that emphasized family above all else, and the American emphasis on individual success and independence. They understood the complexity of loving people who were also harming you, of wanting to help while recognizing that help had become exploitation. These weren't simple situations with easy answers, and I never pretended they were. But I could offer perspective, tools, and most importantly, permission to prioritize their own well-being. In June, Marcus invited me to dinner at a new restaurant downtown. We'd stayed in touch after he'd helped me document everything with my family, occasional emails and texts, but we hadn't seen each other in person in months. When I arrived, he was already seated, looking relaxed in jeans and a button-down shirt. His usual professional demeanor softened. We ordered wine and fell into easy conversation. He asked about the house, about work, about how things were with my family. I gave him the update, the careful distance I was maintaining, my father's visits, my mother's slow progress in therapy. And you, I asked, how's life in the world of numbers and tax codes? He laughed. Thrilling as ever. Though I did just take on a new client, a woman whose husband had been hiding assets for years. Helping her untangle that mess has been satisfying in a way I didn't expect. You like the detective work, I observed. I do, he admitted. There's something gratifying about uncovering the truth, especially when it helps someone who's been taken advantage of. We continued talking as dinner arrived, and somewhere between the appetizers and entrees, I realized this didn't feel like two acquaintances catching up. Felt like a date, and I was okay with that. More than okay, actually. Marcus was kind, intelligent, respected boundaries, and understood financial trauma in a way most people didn't. When he asked if I wanted to do this again sometime, maybe catch a movie or try that new hiking trail in South Mountain, I said yes without hesitation. We started seeing each other regularly after that. Nothing rushed, nothing intense, just two people enjoying each other's company and seeing where it might lead. He met Jessica, who gave her enthusiastic approval. He's good people, she declared after he left one evening. And he looks at you like you're the most interesting person in the room. That's a good sign. I hadn't been in a serious relationship in years, too busy managing my family's chaos to have energy left over for my own life. But with Marcus it felt natural. Easy. He never asked for more than I could give. He respected when I needed space. And he understood, really understood, why I was cautious about letting people get too close. His own parents had divorced messily when he was young. His father remarrying quickly and essentially abandoning his first family. He knew about complicated family dynamics and the scars they left. One evening in July, we were at his place, a sleek condo in Tempe with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. We just finished dinner when he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think you'll ever fully reconcile with your family? Or is this distance permanent?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to believe that with enough time in therapy, we could build something healthier. But another part of me thinks some damage is too fundamental to repair. My mother still hasn't fully acknowledged what she did. Brandon is trying, but I don't know if I trust it yet. My dad is the only one who seems genuinely remorseful, and even that relationship is fragile. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. You know what I've learned working with families and their finances? Sometimes the healthiest thing is to accept that a relationship can't be what you want it to be, and to build a life that doesn't depend on it changing. You've already done that. Everything else is just deciding how much access you want to give them to that life. He was right. I had built something solid and good that existed entirely independent of my family. Whether I let them back in and to what degree was entirely my choice. There was power in that realization, a sense of control I'd never had before. By August, I'd been in my house for 18 months. The place had truly become mine, filled with furniture I'd chosen, art I'd collected, plants I'd nurtured. I'd painted the bedroom a soft sage green, installed new fixtures in the bathroom, and built raised garden beds in the backyard where I was growing tomatoes and peppers. Every improvement, every change felt like a declaration of ownership and permanence. This was my space, shaped by my preferences, reflecting my personality. Nobody could walk in and criticize my choices or make me feel small for how I decorated or what I prioritized. It was mine in a way nothing had ever been mine before. Jessica's birthday fell on a Saturday in late August, and I hosted a small party for her at my place. About 15 people came, a mix of her teacher friends, some mutual acquaintances, and Marcus, who'd become a fixture in our social circle. We grilled on the patio, drank margaritas, and as the sun set, someone suggested we go around and share what we were grateful for. It was cheesy, the kind of thing I would have rolled my eyes at a few years ago, but I found myself genuinely moved by what people shared. Jessica, when it was her turn, looked directly at me. "I'm grateful for friends who show up," she said. "Not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's hard. Rachel, you've been that friend for me, and watching you build this life, watching you choose yourself after years of choosing everyone else, has been one of the greatest privileges of my life." I felt tears prick my eyes. When it was my turn, I said, "I'm grateful for second chances, for the opportunity to rebuild, for people who see me and value me for who I am, not what I can do for them. 4 lemon trees and pottery classes and Saturday morning volunteer work. For all the small joys that add up to a life worth living." Marcus squeezed my hand. Around me, people nodded and smiled, and I felt overwhelmingly fortunate. Not for what I'd been through, but for what I'd built in the aftermath. In September, something unexpected happened. I received a message on social media from my nephew Tyler. He was 10 now, old enough to have his own accounts with parental supervision. His message was simple. "Hi Aunt Rachel. I miss you. Dad said I could write to you if I wanted. Can we talk sometime?" I stared at that message for a long time, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Tyler was innocent in all of this. He'd been a toddler when I started paying my parents' mortgage, a little kid during all the years of dysfunction. None of it was his fault. But engaging with him meant opening a door to Brandon, to that whole side of the family, to complications I'd worked hard to avoid. I called Kristen. "I got a message from Tyler," I said. "I wanted to check with you before responding. Is this something you and Brandon are okay with?" "Absolutely," she said. "Tyler's asked about you a lot. He doesn't understand all the adult stuff, just that his aunt disappeared from his life. If you're comfortable with it, we'd love for you to have a relationship with him. It doesn't have to involve Brandon at all, not if you don't want it to. We can arrange for me to bring Tyler to meet you, just the two of you." I appreciated her understanding. "Let me think about it," I said. "I'll let you know." After we hung up, I talked it through with Marcus and Jessica separately, getting different perspectives. Marcus, predictably analytical, laid out the potential risks and benefits. Jessica, more emotional, said simply, "That kid loves you. Don't punish him for his father's mistakes." In the end, I agreed to meet Tyler for ice cream on a Saturday afternoon. Kristen dropped him off at a place in Chandler, waved to me from the parking lot, and drove away to give us space. Tyler had grown so much since I'd last seen him, taller and leaner, losing the baby roundness in his face. He hugged me tightly when he saw me, and I felt something crack open in my chest. "Hey buddy," I said. "I've missed you too." We got ice cream and sat outside at a picnic table. He told me about school, about his friends, about the soccer team he joined. He told me his dad was working a lot now, that things were different at home but in a good way. "Mom says Dad is trying really hard to be better," he said, licking his chocolate cone. "I don't really get what that means, but everyone seems happier." "That's good," I said. "I'm glad things are better." He looked at me with those serious brown eyes that reminded me of Brandon at that age, before life and poor choices had hardened him. "Why did you stop coming around? Did we do something wrong?" "No," I said, choosing my words carefully. "You didn't do anything wrong. Some grown-up stuff happened between me and your dad and Grandma and Grandpa. Sometimes adults need space from each other to figure things out. It doesn't mean I stopped caring about you." He seemed satisfied with that answer. "Can we do this again?" he asked hopefully. "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it. Kristen and I worked out an arrangement where I'd see Tyler once a month, sometimes for ice cream, sometimes for a movie, sometimes just hanging out at my house playing video games or doing homework. It was good for both of us, I think. He got his aunt back in a limited, boundaried way. I got to maintain a connection to my nephew without having to navigate the complications of a full family reunion. Brandon respected the boundary, never showing up to these meetups, never trying to use Tyler as a way to force contact. According to Kristen, his therapist had been very clear about respecting my boundaries, and for once he was listening. Maybe he was really changing. Maybe the shock of almost losing his family had been the wake-up call he needed. I didn't know, and I didn't need to know. My relationship with Tyler existed independent of my relationship or lack thereof with Brandon. By October, nearly 2 years after the devastating Thanksgiving confrontation, I felt like I'd finally achieved something resembling equilibrium. My life had a rhythm to it, predictable and peaceful. Work during the week, volunteer teaching on Saturday mornings, time with Marcus and Jessica and other friends, monthly outings with Tyler, occasional emails with my father, and blissful stretches of solitude in my house where I could read or garden or just exist without performance or expectation. It wasn't perfect. I still had moments of anger when I thought about the lost decade, the money I'd never get back, the opportunities I'd sacrificed. I still felt a pang of sadness when holidays came around and I wasn't part of the traditional family gathering. But those moments were becoming rarer, less intense, easier to sit with and let pass. In November, my father called to invite me to Thanksgiving at their condo. Just us, he said. You, me, and your mother. Brandon and his family are doing their own thing this year. No pressure, no expectations. Just dinner if you're comfortable with it. I told him I'd think about it. Part of me wanted to say yes to take that step toward reconciliation. But another part of me remembered last year's Thanksgiving, the first one I'd spent without my family, how peaceful and joyful it had been at Jessica's parents' house. Did I want to trade that peace for the potential stress of navigating my mother's carefully controlled emotions and my father's well-meaning but inadequate attempts at bridge building? I talked it through in therapy. I'd started seeing a counselor a few months earlier, someone Jessica had recommended who specialized in family trauma and boundary work. My therapist, Dr. Linda Chan, a calm woman in her 50s who had a gift for asking exactly the right questions, listened to my dilemma. What do you want, she asked. Not what you think you should do, not what would make them happy, but what do you actually want? I want to not care anymore, I admitted. I want to stop feeling this pull between anger and obligation. I want to just feel neutral about them, like they're acquaintances I'm polite to but don't invest in emotionally. And are you there yet? No, I said. I'm not. So maybe, she suggested gently, you're not ready for Thanksgiving dinner. Maybe you need more time. And that's okay. Permission to not be ready yet. It was such a simple thing, but it lifted a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. I called my father back and declined the invitation. I explained that I appreciated the offer, but I wasn't ready for that level of interaction yet. Maybe next year, I said. Or maybe the year after. I need to move at my own pace. He was disappointed, I could hear it in his voice, but he didn't push. I understand, he said. The door's open whenever you're ready to walk through it. Thanksgiving that year was at my house. I hosted a Friendsgiving with Jessica, Marcus, a few coworkers, and some neighbors I'd gotten close to. We cooked together, laughed at our amateur attempts at making stuffing from scratch, and ate until we couldn't move. It was chaotic and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. As we sat around my dining table, mismatched chairs crowded together, plates piled high with food, I looked around at these people who'd become my chosen family. This was what I'd been searching for all along. Not blood relations who took me for granted, but genuine connections built on mutual respect and affection. People who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. People who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. After everyone left and I was cleaning up, Marcus stayed to help. We worked in comfortable silence, washing dishes and putting away leftovers. When we finished, he pulled me into a hug. This was a really good day, he said. Thank you for including me in it. Thank you for being someone worth including, I replied. December brought a cold snap. Unusual for Phoenix but not unheard of. Temperatures dropped into the 40s at night, and I found myself actually using the fireplace in my living room. There was something cozy about it, sitting by the fire with a book and a cup of tea. The rest of the house dark and quiet. One evening, wrapped in a blanket on my couch, I received an email from Brandon. It was longer than his previous attempts at contact, more thoughtful. He wrote about his progress in therapy, about the things he was learning about himself and his patterns of behavior. He wrote about how he'd spent his entire adult life running from responsibility and consequences, always expecting someone else to catch him when he fell. He wrote about how that someone had usually been me or our parents, and how he'd never appreciated the safety net until it was gone. He wrote that he was working on becoming the kind of person who didn't need a safety net, who could stand on his own and contribute rather than just take. He wrote that he understood if I never forgave him, but that he wanted me to know he was genuinely trying to change, not for me or even for his family but for himself, because he didn't want to be that person anymore. I read the email twice, looking for manipulation or excuses, but I couldn't find them. It seemed genuine as Brandon was capable of being. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I saved the email in a folder and let it sit. Maybe someday I'd be ready to engage with his attempts at redemption. But not yet. Not while the wounds were still tender. Christmas came and I sent cards to my parents and Brandon's family. Simple holiday greetings with no personal messages beyond the printed sentiment. I received cards back. There's more elaborate, filled with photos and handwritten notes about how much they missed me and hoped to see me soon. I appreciated the gesture but didn't feel compelled to respond beyond the card I'd already sent. The new year arrived with the usual resolutions and fresh start energy. I didn't make any grand promises to myself, just committed to continuing what I'd been doing. Living intentionally. Maintaining boundaries. Building a life that brought me joy and peace. Staying open to connection while protecting my hard-won independence. In January, I got promoted again at work, this time to a coordinator position that came with a significant raise and more responsibility. It was validating, being recognized for my competence and dedication, in a way my family never had. My supervisor during the promotion meeting said something that stuck with me. You're reliable without being a doormat. You help without enabling. That's a rare combination. And it's exactly what we need in this role. I thought about that later, about how I'd learned those lessons the hard way. How I'd spent years being reliable to the point of self-destruction, helping to the point of enabling, and how breaking those patterns had been the hardest thing I'd ever done. But I'd done it. And now I could bring that wisdom into other areas of my life, including my work. In February, Marcus and I celebrated a year of dating. We went to a nice restaurant in Scottsdale, the kind of place with a tasting menu and wine pairings. Over the course of the meal, we talked about the future, about what we wanted and where we saw this relationship going. I care about you, he said. More than I've cared about anyone in a long time. I'm not in a rush, but I want you to know that I'm in this. For the long term if you are. I am, I said, feeling the truth of it. You've been patient with me, with all my family baggage and boundary issues and trust problems. You've never pushed for more than I could give. That means everything to me. He reached across the table and took my hand. We all have baggage. Yours is just better documented than most. I laughed and we toasted to the future, whatever it held. That spring, nearly 2.5 years after I'd stopped paying my parents' mortgage, I received a call from my father. He sounded different, lighter somehow. I wanted to tell you something, he said. Your mother and I, we sold the condo. What? Why? We realized we were still living above our means, still trying to maintain an image that didn't match our reality. So we downsized again. We bought a small manufactured home in a senior community in Mesa. It's a fraction of the size, but it's ours, truly ours. We can afford it on our own. No help needed. I didn't know what to say. That's good, I finally managed. Really good. And Rachel, he continued, I wanted you to know that we're putting money aside. Not much, we don't have much, but we're saving what we can. When we pass, whatever we have, half of it goes to you. Not as repayment, we could never repay what you gave us, but as acknowledgement. As proof that we see it now. We see what you did. Dad, I said, my voice thick with emotion, you don't have to do that. We do, he said firmly. We really do. After we hung up, I sat with that phone call for a long time, processing what it meant. My parents were finally taking responsibility for their own lives. They were living within their means, making amends in the ways they could, trying to be better. It didn't erase the past. It didn't give me back the decade I'd lost, or the $171,000 I'd spent. But it was something. It was growth. It was change. It was proof that people, even people who'd hurt you deeply, were capable of becoming better versions of themselves if they were willing to do the work. In April, Tyler's 11th birthday came around, and he invited me to his party. It was the first family event I'd been invited to since that disastrous Thanksgiving 2.5 years earlier. I almost said no, almost claimed I had other plans, but something made me reconsider. This was Tyler's day. He wanted me there. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to take that step. The party was at a park in Glendale. Kids running around playing games while adults clustered in groups chatting. I arrived right on time, gift in hand, feeling nervous in a way I hadn't expected. Kristen greeted me warmly, introducing me to other parents and family friends as Tyler's aunt. Brandon was there, of course, and when he saw me, he froze for a moment. Then he walked over slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. "Rachel," he said. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot to Tyler. And to me." I nodded, not quite ready for a full conversation but acknowledging the gesture. We maintained a polite distance throughout the party, but I caught him watching me a few times with an expression I couldn't quite read. Regret, maybe. Or hope that someday we might find our way back to something resembling a sibling relationship. My parents were there too, my mother looking older and more tired than I remembered. We made eye contact across the park, and she gave me a small, uncertain smile. I smiled back, equally uncertain. Later, as the party was winding down, she approached me. "Rachel," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I'm glad you came." "Me too," I said. She looked like she wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just said, "You look well." "Happy." "I am," I said. "I'm really happy." "Good," she said, her eyes getting wet. "That's good." It wasn't a full reconciliation. It wasn't a tearful apology or a dramatic healing moment. It was just two women, mother and daughter, acknowledging each other after years of distance. It was small and imperfect and awkward, but it was also real. As I drove home that evening, the Phoenix skyline glowing in my rearview mirror, I thought about how far I'd come. From that devastating phone call 2.5 years ago, when my mother told me I wasn't welcome anymore, to this moment where I'd chosen to show up at a family event on my own terms. I'd lost so much in the process of setting boundaries and choosing myself. Years of family connection, the illusion of unconditional love, the role I played as the reliable one who held everything together. But I gained something infinitely more valuable. Self-respect. Autonomy. A life built on truth rather than obligation. Relationships that were genuine rather than transactional. And most importantly, the knowledge that I was enough just as I was, without needing to sacrifice myself to prove my worth. The months that followed were a continuation of that slow, careful rebuilding. I attended a few more family events, always on my terms, always with clear boundaries about when I'd arrive and when I'd leave. I started having occasional dinners with my parents at their manufactured home in Mesa. Simple meals where we talked about neutral topics and avoided the painful past. It wasn't the warm, close family relationship I'd once dreamed of, but it was something. A cordial détente. A mutual acknowledgement that we were connected but not enmeshed, related but not responsible for each other's happiness or well-being. Brandon and I remained distant. We were polite at family gatherings, exchanged brief pleasantries, but we didn't have private conversations or try to rebuild what had been broken. Maybe someday that would change. Maybe we'd find our way to forgiveness and a new kind of sibling relationship. Or maybe we wouldn't. Either way, I was at peace with it. Marcus and I continued to grow closer. We talked about moving in together eventually, maybe combining our households and building something new. There was no rush, no pressure, just a mutual understanding that what we had was solid and worth nurturing. In June, on what I'd come to think of as my independence anniversary, the day my mother had told me I wasn't welcome, I threw another party. Not to celebrate the rejection, but to celebrate everything I'd built in response to it. Jessica and Marcus helped me set up lights in the backyard, and we invited everyone who'd supported me through the journey. The house was packed, people spilling out onto the patio, laughter and conversation filling every corner. At one point, I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the crowd, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Not for what I'd been through. The pain and betrayal would always be painful and would always carry weight. But for what it had taught me, that I was stronger than I knew. That I deserved better than what I'd been accepting. That love without respect wasn't really love at all. That family, chosen or blood, should lift you up rather than drain you dry. That saying no to people you care about isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. That you can grieve the family you wanted while building a life with the people who actually show up for you. Jessica found me in the kitchen and pulled me into a hug. "Look at you," she said. "Look at this life you built from nothing. How does it feel?" "Like home," I said. "Feels like home." And it did. Not just the physical house, though I loved every imperfect inch of it, but the life itself. The community I'd built. The boundaries I'd established. The peace I'd fought for. The person I'd become. It felt like home in a way nothing ever had before, because it was authentically, wholly, undeniably mine. As the party continued into the night, I stepped out onto my patio and looked up at the stars. Somewhere across the city, my parents were in their manufactured home, learning to live within their means. Brandon was probably putting his kids to bed, trying to be the father and husband he'd never been before. My mother was likely awake, still struggling with her role in everything that had happened, still unable to fully apologize. And me? I was here in this house I'd bought with money I'd earned, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. I was teaching financial literacy to young adults every Saturday, helping them avoid the traps I'd fallen into. I was dating a man who respected my boundaries and celebrated my independence. I was maintaining a carefully boundaried relationship with my family, one that didn't require me to sacrifice my own well-being. I was for the first time in my adult life genuinely happy, not the forced happiness that comes from pretending everything is fine, but the deep, abiding contentment that comes from living in alignment with your values and protecting your peace. The story of how I got here wasn't pretty. It involved betrayal and loss and painful confrontations. It involved walking away from people I loved because staying was killing me. It involved 2.5 years of rebuilding, of learning who I was without the weight of everyone else's expectations, of discovering that I was enough all on my own. But I wouldn't change it. Not the pain, not the loss, not the difficult choices. Because they led me here, to this moment, to this life, to this version of myself that I was genuinely proud to be. My mother had said I wasn't welcome anymore. Had tried to make me feel small and difficult and ungrateful. But in trying to diminish me, she'd accidentally freed me. She'd given me permission to stop carrying the weight of their financial survival. She'd given me the push I needed to finally choose myself. And when they discovered I'd been paying their mortgage for 10 years, when they saw exactly what they'd taken for granted and thrown away, it was too late to take back the rejection. The damage was done. But so was my liberation. 3 years after that devastating phone call, I was sitting in my backyard on a warm July evening, Marcus beside me, Jessica across from us, and I realized something profound. I'd started this journey thinking I needed my family to see me, to acknowledge what I'd done, to apologize for how they'd treated me. And while some of that had eventually happened, in incomplete and imperfect ways, I'd discovered something more important. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need them to understand what they'd put me through, because I understood. I saw myself clearly, valued myself appropriately, and had built a life that reflected that self-worth. Everything else, the occasional family dinners, the careful relationship with my father, the distant cordiality with Brandon, the strained but slowly improving dynamic with my mother, all of it was just extra. Nice when it happened, but not necessary for my happiness. I was whole on my own. Complete. Enough. And that realization, that deep knowing that I didn't need anything from them to be okay, was the final piece of healing I'd been searching for. The lemon tree in my backyard was heavy with fruit again, branches bending under the weight of all it had to give. I'd learned to care for it properly, to give it what it needed without expecting anything in return. And in response it flourished. Maybe that was the lesson in all of this. That relationships, whether with plants or people, thrived when both parties were valued and cared for appropriately. When the giving and taking balanced out. When nobody was drained to the point of depletion, while someone else flourished on their sacrifice. My family had taken and taken until there was almost nothing left of me. But I'd found a way to regenerate, to grow back stronger, to bloom again in soil of my own choosing. And now, surrounded by people who watered my roots rather than poisoned them, I was finally truly thriving. The mortgage I'd paid for 10 years had bought them a house. But walking away from that obligation had bought me something far more valuable. My freedom. My peace. My life. And that, I'd learned, was worth more than any amount of money, any family approval, Any hollow reconciliation built on guilt rather than genuine change. I was home. Not in the house they'd almost lost, the one I'd sacrificed to save. But here, in this space I'd created. With these people I'd chosen, living this life I'd built from the ground up with nothing but determination and the radical decision to finally, after decades of putting everyone else first, choose myself. And I'd never been happier. That was the real story. Not the betrayal, not the confrontation, not even the slow rebuilding of family relationships, but the discovery that I was capable of saving myself, of building something beautiful from wreckage, of being enough all on my own. My mother had said I wasn't welcome, but in this life I'd created, in this home I'd built, in this version of myself I'd fought so hard to become, I was more than welcome. I was exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.